They said the monastery of St. Euphemia had never fallen, not even when Constantinople itself turned to smoke. It stood above the cliffs, like a prayer carved in stone, its bells once calling across the Bosphorus, its nuns said to speak only with angels. But in the spring of 1453 the angels were silent, and silence, when it lasts too long, becomes something else. When the city's last wall fell, the soldiers came with fire in their eyes and ashes in their mouths. They didn't speak, they only followed the sound of their Sultan's banners snapping in the wind. They took the monastery in an hour. The nuns were gathered in the courtyard beneath the statue of the Virgin. They did not scream. They only clutched their rosaries and sang a hymn that trembled like the last breath of the old world. Their abbess, Sister Theodora, stepped forward, her face pale as candle wax, her voice unshaken. "This house is consecrated," she said. "No mortal may profane it." The captain, wrapped in crimson silk, smiled faintly. "Then call upon your God," he said, and the silence answered for her. They were taken alive, everyone, not to be slain, but kept. The Sultan's orders were clear. The women of God were to be brought to the old fortress on the Golden Horn. There, stone by stone, the monastery was reborn, not as a house of prayer, but as a house of remembrance. For what the empire could not destroy, it would consume. Days turned to weeks. The nuns lived in the fortress like ghosts. They were given food, light, and a strange freedom. They could pray as much as they wished, so long as they prayed aloud, always aloud. Each night, soldiers would pass through the corridors, listening. If a voice fell silent, the door would open, and the silence would be filled again. At first, Theodora kept their faith alive. She told them that the trials of the flesh were only illusions, that the soul remained untouched. But when one of the sisters, young Mariam, began to speak in tongues, not in Latin or Greek, but in a language none of them knew, Theodora's certainty began to waver. For Mariam claimed that the angels still listened, only they no longer spoke from heaven. They whispered through the walls. She said the fortress was hollow, and beneath it slept something ancient. Not an angel, not a demon, something that remembered both. Theodora forbade her from speaking of it, but each night the whispers spread, through dreams, through fever, through the sound of dripping water in the dark. The sisters began to see things, faint light moving beneath the floor, hands pressed from inside the stone. They stopped praying aloud, and that, of course, was when the soldiers came again. One by one the doors opened, but instead of punishment, something stranger happened. The soldiers knelt. They said the women's eyes shone like molten gold, that they spoke a word that no one remembered afterward, a word that burned in the skull like fire. Those who heard it forgot their own names. From that night onward, the fortress changed. No one dared enter without permission. The air grew thick with the scent of incense and sea salt, though no waves reached that far. Inside, the sisters gathered in the old chapel. The crucifix had been removed, and in its place stood a mirror of polished bronze. Mariam would stand before it for hours. When she looked into it, her reflection did not follow her movements, and sometimes, behind her, she swore she saw wings. Theodora prayed harder than ever, but her prayers were met with echoes, her own voice answering her from the mirror, word for word, but slower. Too slow. At last, she understood what had become of them. They were no longer captives of men. They were vessels for something vast, something that had waited beneath the stones for centuries, sealed by faith and silence. And now, through their broken prayers, it had found a way to breathe again. By the time the next Ottoman patrol arrived, the fortress was empty. No bodies, no voices, only the smell of burning myrrh and a low hum, as if the walls themselves were singing. They say that on storm nights, when thunder rolls over the Golden Horn, you can still hear the chant rising from beneath the ruins. Not in Greek, not in Turkish, but in the voice of something that remembers what it once was. Divine, then fallen, now awake. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear them too. The nuns of St. Euphemia, still praying, not for salvation, but for silence. A century passed before anyone dared to open the fortress again. The sea had eaten half its walls. Vines hung like curtains over the blackened stones. Fishermen told tales that their nets tangled in invisible threads beneath the water, and that sometimes, when they pulled them up, they found human hair woven into the ropes. But in 1560, a young scholar from Istanbul, a physician named Kamal ibn Farah, came in search of the truth. He was a rational man, trained in medicine, not myth. He did not believe in spirits or saints, only in what the eye could see and what the mind could measure. Yet even he had heard the whispers. They said the old fortress was cursed, that it swallowed sound, that those who entered heard prayers that were not their own. Kamal laughed at such talk until he stood before the gates himself. The air was too still, the sea too quiet. When he stepped through the archway, even his own heartbeat seemed distant. Inside, the halls were cold and clean, as though the centuries had not touched them. On the walls, faint symbols shimmered when the torchlight passed, circles, wings, and what looked like eyes drawn in gold dust. He followed the markings down to the chapel, and there he found it. The mirror. It stood untouched, a perfect disc of bronze taller than a man, its surface darkened with age. Yet when Kamal looked into it, he saw not his reflection, but a dim image of the sea, waves crashing where there were none. He reached out to touch it, and the metal rippled like water. The moment his fingers brushed it, the air shifted. He smelled incense, faint, distant, and heard a voice. Not one voice, but many. Women's voices, layered upon each other, whispering in prayer. He stumbled back. The sound vanished. But something had followed him. That night he stayed in the village below the cliffs. His hands trembled as he tried to write what he'd seen, but his ink bled across the page like veins. He dreamt of a corridor lined with candles that never burned out, and at the end of it, a woman in white, her eyes gold like molten wax. She spoke to him without moving her lips. "We are not gone," she said. "We are waiting." When he awoke, his room was full of salt water. His journal was dry. Over the following days, Kamal returned again and again to the fortress. He found carvings beneath the dust, writings in both Greek and Arabic speaking of the covenant of silence and the mirror that remembers. Each night he heard the voices clearer. Sometimes they sang hymns, sometimes they wept, and sometimes they laughed, a sound too human to belong to ghosts. On the seventh night, the mirror called him back. He brought no torch. The light came from within the bronze itself, pulsing like a heartbeat. And when he looked into it again, he saw them. The nuns, or what they had become. Their faces were serene, their eyes radiant and empty. They stood in a vast chamber of light and shadow, wings unfurling behind them like torn banners. At the center was Sister Theodora, her hands clasped around the same rosary she'd held when the monastery fell. But now every bead of it glowed with eyes. She looked at him and smiled. "Do you believe in salvation, Doctor?" He could not speak. "The men who took us thought faith was weakness," she said. "They broke our vows, thinking they had unmade us. But God does not die in silence. He transforms." She stepped closer in the mirror. Her reflection grew sharper until it felt as though she stood behind the glass rather than within it. "They called us desecrated," she whispered. "But we were reborn. We saw the face of the divine beneath its skin." Kamal's breath fogged the bronze. "You're not angels," he murmured. "No," she said softly. "We are what angels envy." Her hand reached toward him, and though logic screamed against it, he raised his own. When their fingers met, the mirror shattered. The sound wasn't of breaking, but of release, a long exhale, like the sigh of a world waking from sleep. The fragments fell to the ground, and from them light poured out. Voices filled the chapel, hundreds, maybe thousands, chanting in a tongue no human throat should know. The walls pulsed like living flesh. The floor trembled beneath his feet. Kamal fell to his knees, covering his ears, but the voices spoke inside his head. They showed him visions of the siege, of the night the nuns vanished, of something vast and radiant rising beneath the fortress like a submerged god. He saw the Virgin's face, not carved in marble but alive, her eyes weeping gold, her mouth open in song. He saw Mariam standing before the mirror, wings of light bursting from her shoulders. He saw the abbot's cross melt into water. And then silence. When he woke, the mirror was gone. The chapel was empty again, but carved into the wall before him were new words, written in his own handwriting. Faith was never meant to save us, only to remember us. He fled the fortress and never returned. Years later, his journals were found among the archives of the Imperial Library. Most pages were blank. Only one bore his final note. At night I hear them singing still. The sound is not sorrows, it is joy. Perhaps heaven too was once a prison. No one knows what became of the fortress after that. Some say it finally sank into the sea. Others claim that during low tide, you can still see the mirror glinting beneath the waves, calling to the faithful and the faithless alike. Fishermen avoid those waters, not out of fear but reverence, for they say the prayers still rise, faint and distant, echoing through the deep. And if you listen long enough, you will hear the last words of Sister Theodora, the woman who dared to turn faith inside out. We were his brides, but in the silence we became his reflection.